So some races have natural weapons. This makes sense intuitively. Whenever you have a sort of like quasi lycanthrope type creature, they're going to have big claws. Lizard folk, renowned for their biting power because they're basically crocodile people. Some people have like talons on their feet. There's all kinds of natural weapons, natural attacks, creatures that are clearly designed to be dangerous automatically, usually with some sort of claw or tooth equivalent. And so naturally, the designers want to incorporate that into the game mechanics. When you play this race, you have access to that kind of an attack so that it evokes some of the flavor of the race. Because, that's an interesting idea. Races that don't necessarily need manufactured weapons because they have weapons built into their body. It's pretty cool. But then you run into the difficulty of actually like designing that weapon. And you run into basically a problem on either side, depending on which way you want to go. And the way that 5th edition has decided to do it is to make these garbage weapons. They usually do D6 damage, sometimes D4. A couple of them have done D4s, and anyways, they usually do D6 damage. They're melee only. They don't really have any special properties. So they're as good as using a simple weapon with no feat support, because there's no feats that support natural weapons, which means that you aren't getting any better than baseline weapons. The baseline like weapon damage. That's all you're getting when you use that weapon. And so the question then, if you're doing that, is who is this weapon for? Because if you are a spellcaster, you're not going to be using that weapon. There's no reason for you to use that weapon. If you're a weapon user, there's also no reason for you to use that weapon. You have so many better options. Any class that uses weapons supports those weapons. You get feats to use two-handed weapons, or, you use a ranged weapon or whatever. Whereas natural weapons just have no benefits. They're always going to be worse than whatever baseline weapons you start with. On top of the fact that you can't enchant them, which means that you're missing out on enhancement bonuses once you start getting magic weapons. So it's not for weapon users and it's not for casters. There's no use case for natural weapons aside from like, oh, but what if the party gets kidnapped and all of their stuff taken away? Then you have a weapon. Yeah, you've got a shit weapon. It's like the difference between that and an unarmed strike is so minimal as to be not even worth considering, since that situation is incredibly rare. Like, less than once per campaign on average. And then on the other hand, if you were to make natural weapons too good, well, then you are sort of taking away from the class fantasy. Let's say hypothetically, you made natural weapons actually really good so that you want to use them instead of a normal weapon. You're doing D12 damage dice. You add your proficiency bonus as an enhancement bonus. So it's really, really good. And this makes it better than a standard weapon. Well, then like the fighter, like let's say the lizard folk, just off the top of my head, that's the race with a natural weapon. Let's say you have lizard folk, they do a massive bite. It's so good that they are incentivized to use that instead of whatever normal weapon they would use. So for spellcasters, you still don't care. Except maybe, I guess, you could be incentivized, like if you get pinned in melee, maybe this is an option if it's good enough. But then you shift over to like, the lizard folk fighters and barbarians who use weapons, and now they're using their natural weapon instead of the weapon that the class fantasy is about. You've just replaced class fantasy with race fantasy, which is a weird sentence if you were to take it out of context. So either way, if it's good enough to replace manufactured weapons, then you are detracting from the class fantasy of using weapons, either two-handed weapons or sword and board or, ranged weapons or whatever it is that you may be doing. And if it's not that good, it like instantly switches over to the other side. There's no middle ground. Switches over to the other side, and now you're not using it at all. And it's a useless feature. And it's This is taking up design space in the racial stat blocks for when you're making a playable race. It's like a block of text, takes up space on the page. It takes up, sort of like the design budget of the race for a feature that should never be used. And that is kind of bad design. Is there a solution? Is there a way? I'm getting hair in my mouth, and it's driving me nuts. One moment. Yeah, there it is. All right. So the where was I? Is there a solution? And I think there is. But it's one that 5th edition doesn't really want to do. And I would point you kind of in the direction we're gonna skirt by and not stop at the Dragonborn breath weapon, because that's kind of a natural weapon if you think about it. It doesn't make an attack roll, but it is an offensive ability that is inherent to the race. And so if we were to take something like that, where it is a limited use ability that is usable as an action itself, maybe not as a full action, maybe as a bonus action or something. Imagine if you were to take the Lizard Folk bite ability, and because right now they have that you have your basic bite, and then a limited number of times per day you can bite as a bonus action. So actually, I think the Lizard Folk is the least useless of the natural weapon races, because it has this ability. Like, basically you get the bite, you aren't expected to use the base bite, but that ability interacts with their proficiency bonus times per day bite as a bonus action with an additional rider on top of it. And I think that's kind of how to do natural weapons. I think Lizard Folk probably is the best written natural weapon race. But imagine, like, if you have your natural weapon and you're able to use it as a bonus action, or even as part of the attack action. If you can use it every time you make the attack action, you get, however many attacks you get based on if you have the extra attack feature. And then you also get 1 extra attack with your natural weapon. That's okay. That's pretty good, isn't it? Like, I'm talking about an at-will thing. This is not a limited number of times per day. Because if it does like D6 plus strength, there's no modifiers to that. There's no feat support. There's no, whatchamacallit. There's no enhancement bonuses. So, like, at best, D6 plus 5, by the time you get into, like, higher levels, by the time you get up to a plus 5 in your strength, that's not bad. That's, like, that is something that actually, like, materially adds to the effectiveness of the character. But I think Wizards of the Coast is afraid to give at-will extra damage to martial classes, or to weapon-using classes, I guess I should say, because Ranger and Paladin are also technically weapon users. They're afraid to do it, and I'm not sure why. These classes are obviously outclassed by casters. The full caster classes, the ones that don't care about these abilities at all, are just absolutely trouncing the weapon users in terms of effectiveness and control, and frankly damage output if they care to build in that direction. So I would say a good house rule, honestly, would be to any class or any race that has a natural weapon, let the character use that natural weapon for free when it does the attack action. And then things like the Lizard Folk, you don't want to like overshadow them, but they still get to do their bonus action, another attack, a certain number of times per day, as they do now. And I think that would be a good house rule, because as it stands right now, natural weapons feel like a complete ribbon feature. They're not actually meant to be used. They're just there to take up space on the page and say, hey, we've written some flavor for your race into these stats. Never mind that it's completely divorced from the intended gameplay mechanics. You shouldn't ever use this feature, but it's there because we care about flavor. It's kind of insane design if you think about it. But anyways, that's a house rule that I would say you should consider, because natural weapons are a cool idea that are just implemented really, really badly in 5th edition. But that's my opinion.